So, namaskar friends, and again I welcome you all to lecture number 7. In the last lecture we talked about written language, in the sense we talked about the sentence formation, we talked about the shabd, that is word, and as per the Indian tradition we found out that the sentences have a very deep significance. Likewise, the words also form part of our consciousness, and some kind of language existed in the beginning of consciousness itself, although the formal language came much later. And we also try to learn what kind of language has to be used so that our communication is free from any kind of bias or any kind of falsity. And so Satyam Briyat Priyam Briyat, that has been always the motto, speak the truth, but then the truth should also be spoken in such a way that it is not pinching to somebody. Well, if we look at the Indian knowledge system, friends, we have lot of instances of how communication is built and how it becomes very effective and how it paves way for knowledge creation and decision making. So, continuing with that, I am going to talk about oral traditions that have been the backbone of our Indian culture since ages. And when we talk about Indian knowledge system, the Indian knowledge system runs parallel to its written records in the oral traditions. So, our oral traditions are very rich in dialogue, debate and storytelling, and through these devices we have always been able to define what is life, what is worth living for, what kind of decisions are to be taken, and how we have to relate to each other. So, let us think of this as the foundation of human communication, friends. As I said, the oral tradition preceded the writing traditions. Even if when we talk about the 4 core competencies of language, we always say L, S, R, W, that is, listening comes first in that hierarchy, but here for the sake of discussion the next class will be devoted to listening, and right now we are talking about oral tradition. So, listening, speaking, reading and writing. Now, first of all we start listening in the language acquisition process, and then after we pick those sounds and we start uttering them. So, speaking comes second, and then after some time we make ourselves conversant with written letters, and then we start reading, and towards the end we also start writing, and we develop a sense of grammar and language. So, obviously the oral traditions precede the writing culture, and that is why they form the core of all human communication. And when we talk about soft skill, friends, we are talking about our oral communication. Its effectiveness can make or break careers. So, its effectiveness means if it is effective, it will give you the desired results. If it fails, you fail in your professional life, and that is why it is so important. Let us try to understand the oral tradition that has been prevalent in our Indian knowledge system since ages and has helped us get the true perspective of things. It is one of the oldest, as I said, and the most enduring foundations of human civilization, and it should never be reduced to merely pre-literate phase of culture at sometimes, as sometimes we try to presume that it is just a precursor to our literate phase. No, this has been the carrier of our conscious desire. This has been the carrier of all our expressions prior to resorting to literacy in the modern sense. So, it represents a highly sophisticated epistemic and pedagogic system in which speech, memory, repetition, rhythm and communal participation work together to sustain knowledge across generations. So, Walter J. Wong's work on orality helps us understand that speech in oral cultures is not merely a means of conveying information, but a technology of consciousness shaping cognition, memory, sociality and collective imagination. So, friends, as I said, oral traditions should not be just treated as precursors of literate tradition, rather they are a technology of consciousness as per Wong's observation. In the Indian context, this insight acquires profound philosophical significance, because the earliest and most authoritative knowledge traditions emerge as Shruti. Shruti, that is what is heard. So, what we hear, whatever is conveyed orally to us, that is what we hear. Our earliest authoritative knowledge has emerged through that process of listening or hearing, that is Shruti. The roots of communication competence, audience awareness, verbal presence and relational intelligence lie in ancient oral cultures. So, śravaṇa and smriti. Śravaṇa means listening and smriti means memory. So, śravaṇa and smriti, that is listening and memory, they form the intellectual habit. The Indian concepts of śravaṇa and shruti together offer one of the most powerful frameworks for connecting oral tradition with leadership, personality development and advanced scholarship. In Vedantic pedagogy, the process of learning unfolds through śravaṇa, and śravaṇa is not hearing something superficially, it is deep listening, something that is listened to, contemplated upon and understood. So, in Vedantic pedagogy, the process of learning begins with deep listening leading to manan, that is critical reflection, and then nidhi dhyasan, that is internal realization. So, it all begins with śravaṇa leading to manana and then to nidhi dhyasana. Okay. So, memory in oral traditions is not passive storage, but cultivated through repetition, recitation, contextual reinforcement and embodied practice. And that is the reason, friends, you may have observed that we still orally chant many of our mantras and orally recite many of our epics. It is very common in Indian household to hold Ramcharitmanas Path or Bhagavad Gita Path, and you will find that there is a particular kind of style that is followed universally, and that is helpful in memorizing the next step. So, this has direct relevance for leadership and personality development, because memory strengthens credibility. Leader who remembers everything and takes decisions based on all knowledge and observation available on a particular matter is somebody who is considered very sound, rather than leader who is fickle minded and forgetful. So, this has direct relevance for leadership and personality development, because memory strengthens credibility, trust, relational continuity and decision making maturity. And so, oral culture trains the mind to convert listening into reflexive intellectual habit, demonstrating that knowledge survives when hearing becomes remembrance and remembrance becomes disciplined cognition. So, when you develop that kind of potency, that kind of tendency to listen to people and reflect upon that, you become a mature evaluator of a situation. So, śravaṇa and smriti, they are very important. Another very important aspect that we learn from the oral traditions is the dialogue. Dialogue in fact is the birthplace of mentorship and leadership. It happens when one person enters into some kind of talk with another person. So, one of the defining strengths of oral tradition is its ability to generate knowledge through dialogue. Dialogue means samvāda. So, one person shares his curiosity with the other person and the other person responds to that, and this is how dialogue takes place, and through that dialogue a new insight is developed on a particular matter. Indian civilization offers some of the world's greatest dialogic moments. For instance, Yam and Nachiketa in the Katha Upanishad, Jagnavalakya and Gargi in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Krishna and Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita, the Buddha and his interlocutors in the Nikayas, and numerous Jain and scholastic exchanges. They provide a very rich and varied ground for meaningful dialogue. In the leadership and professional development, dear friends, the most effective leaders today are those who can mentor, coach, mediate conflict and enable clarity through conversation. You might have heard that the real solution to a problem does not lie in war or military operations. Every war comes to an end through meaningful dialogue. We are so happy, friends, the humanity was going through a very bad phase. Everywhere we were hearing of the war between Iran, Israel, USA, Lebanon and Russia and Ukraine, that is already going on, Pakistan, Afghanistan and so on and so forth. Now, what is the way forward? How the humanity will survive? Will such conflicts resolve by military operations? Will that be fair on the human civilization? The answer is no. So, what is one thing that we can really rely upon? It is the power of dialogue. When the two parties come to a discussion table and share their concerns and assert their sovereignty in their own way and find a middle path, then only real truth and peace will be restored. So, we find that the true leaders are those who are capable of dialogue. They are open minded, they are receptive, they are also capable of asserting themselves with no hurting to others' sentiments. They still assert themselves, make the other party see clearly through their intentions. The Bhagavad Gita remains one of the finest models of crisis communication in world thought, friends, where speech restores courage, moral direction and agency under conditions of paralysis. We all visualize that particular moment when the armies of Kauravas and Pandavas, huge armies of Kauravas and Pandavas have assembled in the middle of Kurukshetra, and there Krishna himself is the charioteer of Arjun, one of the greatest warriors of the Pandavas. Suddenly he is filled with remorse, filled with moral and ethical crisis, drops down his anchor and refuses to fight. Now, at this particular moment, Lord Krishna through dialogue with him tries to make him do whatever is expected of him. He makes him see what is the true motive of this war, the restoration of dharma. He makes him fight because he says that this is your karma at the moment. It is through the questions of Arjuna, or rather his apprehensions, and through the preachings of Lord Krishna, all the apprehensions of Arjuna come to a rest, and ultimately he is ready to fight. So, we find how dialogue is so effective even in such critical situations, and this is no different, friends, when it comes to modern day wars and such critical situations that might emerge in our professional lives as well from time to time. So, after dialogue, another very important aspect of our Indian oral tradition has been debate. Debate, collective intelligence, and the ethics of disagreement. The oral tradition, especially that of India, is not only narrative and philosophical, it is also rigorously argumentative and collaborative. It is not that the communication is one sided, the communication is always interactive, interpersonal, it is mutual. It is not that one person tries to coerce the other in believing what he or she thinks is right. Rather, the final decision comes through arguments, through collaborative thinking, in which every party, every contributing party shares the same space. The Nyāya distinctions between Vāda, that is truth oriented discussion, Jalpa, that is competitive argument, and Vitanda, mere destructive criticism, remain astonishingly contemporary in their relevance to communication ethics. So, friends, we need to understand that there is Vada, that is truth oriented discussion, meaningful discussion, and it has to be distinguished from Jalpa, which is competitive argument, where people do not have any logic, still they try to win the battle by raising their voice or by trying to dominate the other, or Vitanda, which is just a kind of destructive criticism, not amply grounded in any kind of reality or truth. So, if you are capable of understanding whether you need Vada or you are being trapped in Jalpa and Vitanda, you will become a very good leader, very informed leader. Yet beyond individual reasoning, Indian debate traditions also reveal the importance of collective intelligence, where truth is stabilized through public repetition, communal correction, dialogic refinement, and sustained testing across generations. So, we find that in Indian traditions we find all sorts of debates and discussions, some truth seeking, some just trying to win by hook or by crook, and some for mere propaganda or unjustified criticism. So, Bada, Jalpa and Vitanda, they are all part of our Indian system. But what we can learn from it is the power and importance of collective intelligence. Friends, when we teach group discussion, we always say two minds are better than one. That means when we collectively think, probably we can think of more solutions or manifold solutions to a problem compared to when we think individually. So, collective intelligence, where truth is stabilized through public repetition, communal correction, dialogic refinement and sustained testing across generations. And this establishes the knowledge that is purged out of incorrections, corruptions and malpractices. So, this resembles our modern system of peer review. Well friends, when we send our papers for publication, they are sent for peer review. Now, what is this peer review? Our other colleagues look at our paper and they try to seek its meaningful contribution and look at it critically and make their comments and observations, and we make changes based on them, and that makes our paper, which was written by us alone, collective intelligence product, a product of collective intelligence. It no longer remains the product of one person. So, modern peer review, collaborative research ecosystems which are so vital to our modern day organizations, institutional decision making. Well friends, in most of the organizations we have some apex bodies taking decisions, like in our institute we have the Senate, which is the highest body, and all the decisions are made based on democratic discussions in the honorable Senate. Likewise, in our country the honorable parliament takes the decision after much deliberation. And team based leadership, friends, we are looking forward to leaders who can lead the team rather than impose themselves upon the team without valuing their team members. So, such Indian traditions of discussion, debate, dialogue, they come very handy even now when we try to take informed decisions. One can learn how to disagree without hostility, critique without cynicism, and defend positions with dignity and openness. Friends, all we learn through soft skills is that how to be effective without sounding pompous or verbose, how we can maintain our calm composure when we are being attacked from every side. Well, the professional attitude calls for emotional regulation and restraint. There is no place for emotional outburst in a professional setting. So, even if we have to disagree with someone, we have to disagree with arguments, logic, convincing power, and not showing any kind of hostility. We can critique without any kind of cynicism, but that criticism must be grounded in our proper understanding of that situation. We can also defend ourselves, but then with utmost respect and dignity and openness to listen to others without being rigid, resistant and arrogant. Likewise, storytelling is one of the most potent mediums of communication, and it still remains one of the most sought after modes of oral communication. So, storytelling, oral formulaic theory and narrative leadership, when we talk about them, we find that storytelling, as I said, is one of the most transformative dimensions of oral tradition, and its sophistication becomes clearer through oral formulaic theory, especially the work of Milman Perry and Albert Lord. Now, what is that oral formulaic theory? This theory explains how vast oral epics survive through formulaic expressions, and these expressions over the years and generations have been standardized. So, when we recite some mantras, there is a formula. When we recite Ramcharitmanas, there is a formula, and this is going on for generations. These formulaic expressions, recurring motifs, stock phrases, rhythmic clusters and repeated thematic structures that aid memory and performance are very important in our life. This is how we form a kind of structure to understand and to utter in our life. This helps explain the resilience of epic stories and regional storytelling traditions, where repetition is not redundancy, but a deliberate architecture of memory. We repeat not because we are falling short of words, rather we are repeating because we want to make that particular utterance a part of our memory forever. Notably, memorable speakers, teachers and public intellectuals often rely on recurring phrases, thematic hooks and narrative loops that enable retention. Friends, that is what which makes us special in some way or the other, and we start expecting from each other. If we know a particular leader talks like this, we will expect that from that particular leader. That becomes his distinctive style, and that draws us towards that leader, and leader in turn believes that his phrases have been so well received that he is always inclined to make use of them in each of his speeches. So, storytelling remains central to public speaking, pedagogy, entrepreneurship, branding, institutional vision building and motivational leadership, because it transforms abstract ideas into emotionally resonant meaning. Think of the modern day advertisements, you will find that there are some taglines, and these taglines are shown to us 1,000,000,000 times, maybe 1,000 times at least, till they become part of our living memory. Fine. And why they do it? Why? Because they create some kind of effect, impression and identity of that particular product in the mind of all the prospective customers. When we talk about the oral literate interface, when text stores and voice renews, this debate is also nothing new, whether oral is more powerful or written record is more powerful. What sustains knowledge? At the outset, let me tell you one thing, that they are not competitive, they are complementary. So, the relationship between orality and writing must not be reduced to a simple opposition. A more sophisticated framework is the oral literate interface, where text and voice coexist in mutually reinforcing ways. While it is important to have a copy of Ramcharitmanas or Mahabharata in front of us, the oral rendition of the same is equally important. The written words do not emit that tone which we use while orally transmitting that message, and that tone certainly has a lot to do with how that particular sentence is received and understood. This is especially important in Indian traditions, where manuscripts preserve the textual body of knowledge, yet recitation, commentary, exposition and parampara tradition preserve its living spirit. So, Walter Wong's insight that writing restructures consciousness remains important, yet Indian knowledge systems remind us that knowledge survives longest when writing stores it and voice renews it. So, you write a book and then keep it in the shelf and never read it, that book will not survive. But if you publish that book, read it, it survives longer. And that is why I said that oral and written traditions of communication are complementary to each other, they never compete with each other. They both have different functions, but the ultimate goal is sustaining communication. That is why friends, we should put enough or equal emphasis on both of them. Many students can write effectively yet struggle in interviews, viva, seminars, teaching and public discourse, because they have not learned to orally inhabit what they know. And all of us know, friends, just being wonderful writers does not really help. Had it been sufficient enough, our transcripts could have been enough to give us jobs, but no, we are asked to appear for seminars, we are asked to appear before interview boards, because we also want to test whether orally we are able to communicate our understanding and knowledge with other people. So, when we talk about oral tradition, decoloniality and the vernacular knowledge systems, we find that oral traditions preserve folk archives, subaltern memories, indigenous ecological wisdom, healing practices, regional literatures, ritual knowledge and community histories that often remain marginalized within colonial and modern text centric frameworks. Friends, when we talk about the corpus of knowledge, our attention is diverted towards the big libraries. Now we have virtual libraries. So, those databases that contain the written records of knowledge, but we still find that knowledge is not only confined to these archives and libraries, the knowledge is floating in our oral traditions as well. There are many communities that continue to hold their traditions, to keep their storytelling traditions alive, their knowledge of the world, of a particular set of understanding of the world remains intact in their oral traditions. And that is why, friends, for developing proper understanding of this world, we cannot solely rely on the text centric frameworks that are inadequate, and these text centric frameworks in many ways are colonial, because the colonials were so fond of recording and documenting everything. By foregrounding oral histories, community storytelling, ritual memory and vernacular pedagogies, Indian knowledge system challenges the assumption that only written archives constitute legitimate knowledge. We believe that the knowledge is floating in our oral traditions as well. For leadership and soft skills audiences, it develops cultural intelligence by showing that effective leadership requires sensitivity to local narratives, collective memory and plural ways of knowing. So, if you want to be a good leader, you must be open to the suggestions made by everybody. You must understand people culturally, not literally, because your literal knowledge will not be enough to take an informed decision. For that, you need to develop proper understanding of the cultural grounding of the people. So, oral traditions here become politics of epistemic justice, reminding viewers that some of the most valuable forms of wisdom survive outside formal textual institutions. So, friends, you will find that in traditional societies, they still take their decisions based on the learnings that have propagated throughout their generations. They are not the people who have gone to the voluminous books on law. Polyphony, what is that? Multiplicity of voices. This calls for plural understanding of truth and a situation. It results in multiple perspectives, and leadership certainly looks forward to such multiple perspectives in order to be ascertained of its decision. So, modern literary theory, especially Mikhail Bakhtin's dialogism. What is this dialogism? We talked about dialogue. Dialogism talks about the competing voices while discussing something, which generate multiple perspectives on a particular situation or fact, leading to critical inquiry and multiple possible solutions to a problem. It allows us to understand oral tradition as a profoundly polyphonic space where multiple voices coexist productively rather than collapsing into singular authority. So, decisions should not be imposed on people from someone who assumes authority, but rather it should be, based on common consensus or taking in view the dissenting voices as well. Indian epics such as the Mahabharata exemplify this brilliantly with Krishna, Draupadi, Karna, Vidura, Bhisma and Yudhishthira all articulating ethically distinct perspectives. This multiplicity is deeply relevant for team leadership, conflict mediation, comparative research and interdisciplinary scholarship, because complex problems rarely yield to one dimensional thinking. So, friends, it is very important for you to look at a particular thing from different perspectives, seek opinions of people and accommodate as much as you can in your critical thinking rather than being unitary, authoritative and one dimensional. So, great leaders do not impose monologue, that is just one sided communication. They create situations that are dialogic ecosystems where perspectives can interact without premature closure, and you look at all the possible outcomes, all the possible ways of taking a decision and then take an informed decision. So, oral tradition thus becomes a training ground for empathy, perspective taking, collaborative reasoning and dialogic leadership. So, orality is fundamentally performative and embodied because we are speaking. So, meaning in oral traditions emerge not only through words, but through tone, rhythm, gesture, gaze, pause, posture, bodily emphasis and audience interaction. So, Indian forms such as Harikatha, Katha Kalashepa, Pandavani, temple recitations and folk ballads, so that the body itself becomes a vehicle of knowledge. So, confidence is not merely an internal feeling, but a practiced ability to align voice, posture, timing and rhetorical emphasis. If you want to be an effective communicator, friends, your body also has to join your communication. You need to understand what is the best way you can communicate. Oral tradition here becomes an ancient school of presence, stage confidence, persuasive delivery and communicative authority. Likewise, one of the most overlooked dimensions of oral wisdom traditions is the role of silence, pause and reflective speech. In classical pedagogy, friends, silence is not emptiness, but a charged interval which allows for meaning to deepen, which allows time for reflection and gains ethical weight. So, strategic pauses create emphasis, invite absorption and prevent reactive speech. So, it is not that you will keep speaking without a pause, without letting the other person absorb what you are saying or form his opinion about what you are saying. That is not considered good communication. A good communicator is one who knows how to use his controlled silence. It reflects calm, confidence and emotional intelligence. So, friends, oral traditions teach us how to allow thought to ripen before speech emerges. Walter Wong's concept of secondary orality helps explain why oral tradition remains intensely relevant even in our digital age. We can look at the modern ways of oral tradition: podcast, YouTube lectures, live streams, audio courses and digital storytelling channels. They revive the ancient strengths of oral culture: voice, immediacy, audience intimacy, serial narration and participatory exchange. So, ancient śravaṇa, that is hearing, returns today as digital listening literacy, while Katha reappears through podcast, public lectures and knowledge channels. For leadership, learners and content creators, it reinforces the value of voice, storytelling and dialogic responsiveness in building influence and trust. So, oral tradition moves from Vedic recitation to podcast culture, while preserving its central role in communication, mentorship, public scholarship and digital leadership. Friends, so oral tradition ultimately reveals itself as comprehensive school of human thought, and it trains listening through śravaṇa, memory through smriti, inquiry through dialogue, rigor through debate, persuasion through storytelling, plurality through polyphony, confidence through performance and wisdom through reflective silence. Yet, its deepest lesson lies in the ethics of voice, not merely how to speak, but how to become worthy of being heard. So, it facilitates responsible persuasion, truth oriented communication, empathetic dialogue and trust building. So, civilizations remain alive not because they merely record knowledge in books, but because they continue to speak it responsively, hear it deeply, challenge it rigorously and retell it meaningfully across generations. So, friends, in the nutshell, let me tell you that oral communication is very important, because it is not through the written rules that our professional lives are governed. It is also through how those written rules are conveyed to us, what kind of spaces are provided to us for reaction, response and participation, and that is why oral communication remains vital as a soft skill. These are the bibliographies. Thank you very much, friends, for your kind attention. Please join me for the next class, in which we are going to talk about listening, one of the key skills in communication. Thank you very much.